Hello, beautiful sacred souls. When overwhelm looks like psychosis, integrating fear, meaning, and spiritual awakening. I am Allison Batty-Capps of Blossoming Heart Wellness and author of The Divine Within. And today I want to talk about a deeply misunderstood and deeply personal experience. When an overwhelmed nervous system, trauma history, and deep sensitivity create experiences that can look like psychosis, but are actually states of survival, symbolic meaning-making, and nervous system processing. I'll share my own journey because it illustrates how protective parts, child trauma, and observer consciousness interact, and how this can be differentiated from traditional psychosis in a trauma-informed, compassionate way. This is for anyone who has ever been told that they were crazy, delusional, or pathological, when in reality, their nervous system and psyche were responding to overwhelm while still seeking meaning and interpretation. So what does overwhelm and dorsal vagal collapse look like? Well, this is the body's protective shutdown. When we experience overwhelming fear or trauma, the nervous system may shift into a dorsal vagal collapse, a shutdown state. This looks like dissociation, emotional numbing, altered sense of self, slowed body systems, fragmented attention. And this state is protective, not pathological. It says, I cannot tolerate this level of overwhelm. I need to down-regulate and protect myself. In my experience, child parts and protectors were activated in this state. They sometimes hijacked my body and my system, expressing raw fear and extreme distress, which could look chaotic or psychotic to an outside observer. However, my observer consciousness remained intact, noticing what was happening and seeking coherence. I also want to share an important piece. I was punished for having emotions as a child, so I learned to fear my own body and the intuitive protective aspects of emotions, what they communicate about needs, boundaries, and safety. That fear made it harder to integrate the spiritual and symbolic meaning of my experiences, even though part of me was deeply awake and attuned to something larger than myself. From an outside perspective, people thought I had schizophrenia and bipolar, and I was diagnosed and told that I had a broken brain and there was no meaning in the experiences. However, I have done deep integrative work and have healed a lot of my childhood trauma wounds and developed a deep relationship with parts of myself that used to take over. Now, when my system becomes overwhelmed, my parts will give me a warning, a thought, a signal, metaphorical pause now and go inward, to help me notice that dorsal vagal collapse may be coming and to regulate before it escalates. This is an incredible evolution of self-awareness and internal communication. I was also so afraid to talk about what I was experiencing because I didn't fully understand it yet. From the start, people pathologized my experience instead of being curious or helping me regulate. This response increased fear in my system, made protective parts more reactive, made the experiences appear even more like psychosis externally. Because of abuse and attachment trauma, my parts didn't fully trust my observer consciousness, and there was no centralized sense of ego. They were trying to get me to help them understand who we were, which was confusing because I thought I already knew myself. Meanwhile, people were telling me that my brain was broken, that there was no trauma and no meaning. This lack of validation amplified fear and fragmentation, making the protective activation appear more extreme. So what is observer consciousness, and what is the key differentiator between someone like me and someone who has a traditional diagnosis of schizophrenia? Well, one of the most important distinctions between a psychosis-like crisis and traditional psychosis is that you remain aware internally. You understand and know that something unusual is happening internally. You can reflect on it and anchor in awareness. You notice protective parts, fear, and symbolic and spiritual content. You retain a sense of self separate from the overwhelming experience, and you seek meaning after the episode. In traditional psychosis, reality testing may collapse. There is less continuity of self. Hallucinations or delusions may dominate without insight. And there usually isn't the urge to go analyze and make sense of the experience. There's the belief that the experience was absolute truth. In trauma-induced overwhelm, symbolic meaning-making coexists with fear and protection. The nervous system may be reactive, but integration and observer awareness are possible. And this is what allows for healing and spiritual growth. So let's explore meaning-making in the midst of fear. As a child, I had spiritual awakenings and symbolic awareness. I was deeply attuned and awake, but I had no safe container to explore these experiences. Protective parts often express raw survival fear, and I was punished for emotional expression, making it hard to trust my body or emotions as guide. However, I was creating poetry all the time, and I was talking about these themes and how the masses were asleep. So here's some key points. Child parts focused on survival, sometimes overwhelming expressions. Observer consciousness was noticing symbolic themes and journaling and creating outlets for that through creativity. However, there was a fragmented ego due to abuse and attachment trauma. Parts didn't trust my observer consciousness. An integration became possible once parts trusted me and I was able to regulate and establish safety. When these layers are acknowledged and held safely, symbolic and spiritual experiences become sources of wisdom, not pathology. So here is the danger of pathologizing meaning. When intense symbolic and spiritual experiences are labeled as psychosis, people are often medicated or silenced. Meaning-making is discouraged. The nervous system remains deregulated. Protective parts remain activated. And this approach blocks integration and healing. For both traditional psychosis and for individuals like me whose psychosis is primarily trauma adaptation, trauma-informed care shows that people recover better when supported with tools, safety, compassion, and permission to explore meaning, even in experiences traditionally labeled as schizophrenia or psychosis. So how can you support someone safely? If someone you know is experiencing this kind of overwhelm, it is important for you to stay grounded yourself in a calm body with a stable voice. Acknowledge the experience, not the content. I hear how this feels for you. I'm here with you. Avoid confronting truth. Don't argue about the hallucinations or symbolic interpretations. Support regulation through movement, breath, grounding, and relational presence, and invite curiosity. What is this like for you? What part of you feels that? Contain the system safely. Focus on safety and integration, not judgment. And for those of you who might be experiencing this type of experience, you can strengthen your observer consciousness and build an inner relationship. There are practical ways to reconnect with observer consciousness and cultivate a strong inner relationship with your parts. It begins by practicing pausing and noticing. So when overwhelm rises, ask, which part of me is speaking? What are they afraid of? Label the experience. Naming it, a part of me is afraid or sad or overwhelmed. This helps parts feel seen without judgment. Dialogue with the parts, internally or through writing. Ask your parts what they need and reassure them that they are safe. And anchor in the body through breath work, gentle movement, or grounding practices that help observer consciousness stay connected to the body. And bring in curious witnessing. View parts as messengers, not enemies. Notice what they communicate about past trauma, needs, or spiritual awareness. And then invite in integrative reflection. After regulating, reflect on symbolic or spiritual meanings safely through analysis by doing research on those metaphorical themes. Your observer consciousness guides you through meaning making without being overwhelmed. Over time, this strengthens the connection between parts and the observer, which allows early warnings of overwhelm and supports safe integration of trauma, fear, and spiritual insight. Healing is not about erasing experiences or avoiding overwhelm. It's about holding fear, emotional protection, and spiritual insight simultaneously with safety, regulation, and compassion. Your story matters. It shows that we can honor childhood trauma, sexual and attachment trauma, nervous system activation, spiritual awareness, emotional fear, and symbolic insight all at once, without shame, without dismissal, and without pathologizing meaning itself. Now, my parts give me early warnings when overwhelm is building. A thought, a signal, or a metaphorical pause now and go inward, which helps me regulate before collapse, And then I can continue integrating safely. With safety and support, integration becomes possible, and the human mind, body, and spirit can flourish even after extreme overwhelm. If this resonates, I invite you to like, subscribe, follow, comment, share. I also invite you, if it resonates, to explore my book, The Divine Within, Healing Ourselves to Heal the World, which explores this topic in more depth, including a little bit more about my personal journey of healing and integration and how I use these tools in everyday life and how they can support you. Or go to my website, blossomingheartwellness.com, to learn about online courses and to sign up for my newsletter. Sending you deep love and appreciation for who you are, no matter where you are on your journey of healing.